Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the RPE podcast, where we aim to bridge the gap between rehabilitation and performance. I'm your host, Connor. Today, we're going to be talking about a really juicy topic, something we haven't really covered before. So last year in 2023, sorry about the long wait, we covered a lot of things, everything from general topics, from plyometrics to ACL rehab to ankle rehab to general principles of rehab and programming. We also did some athlete stories and things like that. With our last one with Jess, that was really popular. That was really good. But today we're doing something a little different. We're going to be doing a research review. So we're going to be looking at a research article. We're going to be analyzing, taking it apart, and then looking at how we can apply that to our practice, whether it be in rehab, whether it be in performance, and just seeing whether we think some of the concepts are applicable or whether we need to work on them a little bit. So as usual, I'm joined by Steve. How are you, mate?
Yeah, mate, doing well. It's bloody hot up here at the moment. And I'm in a February Christmas shirt, so I'm trying to keep it nice and relaxed. Hang on to the festive season as long as I can.
Good, good. So not only joining myself and Steve today, we've brought in a heavy hitter of the profession, one of our close mates, who's also had a mention in a previous episode. If you listen to our chat with Jess, you will have heard this guy before, and that is Nathaniel Mills. How are you, mate?
Good, boys. I'm good. Thanks for having me. And don't complain about being hot, mate. It's hot up here in Rocky.
So I think there's no doubt about when I say that the person who is struggling the most with the heat is me down in Tasmania. I think Rocky, there's no heat at all. Brizzy, no heat. Tassie, it's cooked, man. Like it is so
It's
hot.
pretty hot down there.
Yeah. No, thanks for coming on, man. I remember we caught up for uni a couple of weeks ago now. We had everyone back in the same spot after not having seen everyone for 3 or 4 years, thanks to a little pandemic. But Nathaniel came up to me and he said, "Hey, mate, I really like what you're doing on the podcast. How can I get involved?" And we thought this would be a great avenue to get Nat on because he is a very well-educated guy. He does have a couple of degrees. He's got not only a physiotherapy degree, but I believe it's a chemical engineering degree. Is that right?
Yeah, it's a very expensive piece of paper, a chemical metallurgical engineering degree that I haven't used. So,
Great. So
yes.
before we get into the paper today, do you just want to give us a little bit of a background into yourself, kind of how you got into the profession, and then kind of what you're up to now, and then we'll crack in.
Yeah, I got to try and keep it short because my usual spiel goes for about 10 minutes. But basically, when I was finishing school, I couldn't pick between physio and engineering. I did engineering because my mates were doing it. Hated that. Long story short, my folks wouldn't let me drop out of it, so I finished the degree. Come out in a bit of a mining downturn, and I wasn't super passionate about it to begin with. Did like 50 job interviews for a graduate position, couldn't get it. And then my missus, who's a physio, Liz, she sort of convinced me to put my ATAR in for a physio and haven't looked back. I've always sort of wanted to help people. I've always enjoyed like teaching people, helping people. So I feel like physio is just a really good marriage of sort of like teaching people new skills, teaching people how to do things that they're struggling to do, helping them. And as far as like my career progression, it's been a bit of a weird and wonderful journey from new graduate to where I am now. I started in private practice in Brisbane, then we moved up to Rockhampton. I did another 2 years of private practice. And while I was in that private practice in Rockhampton, naturally just sort of fell into neuro. Basically, the guy who was doing neuro at our clinic in Rocky, he moved out to Blackwater and someone basically had to pick up the caseload. Being relatively new to the clinic and to the area, I was pretty keen to sort of just put my hand up for anything, and no one else really wanted to take on these clients. And I thought, well, look, if no one else will do it, I'm pretty keen to give it a go. I've got no idea what I'm doing, but I'll have a crack. And now I'm practicing by myself as a home physio, pretty well exclusively seeing NDIS participants, and it's mostly neuro clients. And I guess I'm hoping to apply some of the S&C stuff to the neuro space. I think I was talking to Connor about this before the show, Steve, and basically I think we tend to wrap our neuro clients in cotton wool. Like we're really afraid that they're going to fall, they're going to break themselves. And I think they're a population that have a lot of potential and just don't get loaded near enough. And this is something I sort of want to be able to transfer back into the neurospace and see if we can push them a lot more than what we are.
I want to jump in with my two biggest bugbears on neuro research, things that like just give me the biggest shits ever. Like one was when I was learning about motor neuron disease, and it was just like exercise, like almost contraindicated. It's like, don't do it, waste of time, you're just gonna waste your energy. You look at all the research studies that have been done, and they've like, yeah, this person was really fatigued after doing 3 sets of 15 RM. Just like one, like the fuck,
that's
like
so many reps for someone who's never done exercise.
I would be destroyed. And like 15 RM, like how could you then repeat it? Like obviously A, it probably wasn't an RM because you could repeat it, but then B, why the fuck are they throwing that much volume? And then they're like, yeah, this person has like neurological fatigue, and we just tried to kill them, and yeah, they didn't enjoy it very much. And then like MS, the more progressive stuff is coming on more now, using like auto regulation and everything, which is actually cool, and using power training, like some Parkies kind of stuff where they're doing like low rep, high load, and all like high velocity, and that's actually cool to see. But like some of the earlier stuff, there was like giving you rubbish or even like somehow good results, and you're just like, all right, I have no idea how you thought this program was going to work for anyone. Sorry, that's my rant off. And the other thing I wanted to say, as a chemical engineer, Nate, would you be able to just recite the Krebs cycle for us, please, and just to show your credibility?
What's a Krebs?
Mate, I think you're the only person in our degree who could cite the Krebs cycle. I can't remember it.
No, just taking the piss.
I wanted to make a joke when you said full of potentials. Like, yeah, full of potential, just not action potentials. Something horrible. Like
the old
that.
Krebs cycle. I thought I was done with the Krebs cycle. I should have known being on a podcast with you, Steve, would bring it up again.
Yep. So
you're an engineer, mate. Chemical.
Not that kind.
Cool. So outside of work, Nat, what do you like to do? Where can we find you?
I mean, I used to play a lot of squash, probably not as much anymore. At the moment, I'm doing a lot of Pilates, and don't shoot me. A lot of Pilates.
Pilates is great for you.
It is. It's just a bit of a hot topic in the physio space, I think. Can be a little bit polarizing, but maybe we'll talk about that another time. And golf. Golf's my main passion at the moment. I've spent like 3 hours down there this afternoon. Being a sole practitioner, I get a bit of spare time to shoot down to the course. And not having a 2-year-old at the moment as well gives me a little bit more time. But yeah, mostly golf at the moment.
Great.
Good luck with that later.
Yeah, I know.
So before we jump in, a couple of things. We have had a big hiatus from the podcast, but we haven't been doing nothing. Like we have been planning, we have been trying to organize things in the pipeline for the future. One of them was getting Nathaniel on board. Another thing was we're now on Instagram. So come give us a follow at RPE Pod on Instagram. We're going to put up hopefully something each week that you can either learn from or that'll just send you towards some of the work we're doing. And that'd be awesome if you guys could give it a like and a share if you're listening. We're also working on a YouTube channel. So if you do like the sound of our voices and you want to see if you like the look of our faces, you can now catch us on YouTube, which I will put up pretty soon after the audio is released. So if it's not quite up after you've listened to this and you want to catch a look at us, then sorry, I'm a bit slow at that.
I'd like to put in a caveat there. I've been doing nothing. You've been doing a lot of stuff, Connor. So,
well,
you've got a 2-year-old. He doesn't.
Just carrying the team. All good.
Yeah. Only other last announcement would be if you like what we talk about today, it's a super interesting topic, and I think we'll get some awesome discussion out of it. If you guys want to send in any research article for us either to deconstruct or review, we can either cover it on the podcast or we can chat about it via emails, and we'll put all that in the link in the description below. So yeah, any other feedback we're welcoming as well. So if you like the topic or you want to hear something else, just let us know. And without further ado, Today, we are going to be talking about an article that was released in 2016 in the Journal of Sports Sciences. The lead author was Chiara Milanesi. I hope that's how you say it, out of Verona, Italy. And the title of the paper is The Effects of Two Different Correction Strategies on the Snatch Technique in Weightlifting. So essentially, a little bit of background for this paper would be when we're coaching someone or when we're teaching someone a new movement, we tend to use one or two methods of getting some feedback across to them. And the most common way that we do that, either in physio or performance or rehab or whatever it might be, is direct feedback. So like verbal instruction, and that can either be descriptive or prescriptive. Descriptive being, hey, you're not bending your hips before you jump, and prescriptive being, yes, you should bend your hips more before you jump. So that's one type of feedback that you can give to someone who's trying to learn a new skill. But this paper looks at the second type of feedback, and that is the method of amplification of error. So essentially, the person does the movement, and then whatever they see to be the primary error or the primary thing that they didn't do so well, if we can call it an error, we'll go over that, in their movement, if we actually tell them to do the opposite thing, will their body self-organize and try to figure out its own way to do it? So the authors affirmed that during these instructions, so whether direct or whether with the method of amplification of error, which we'll just call MAE for concisity reasons, external focus of attention, so external cues, they were the best thing to go to. And we've talked about that before in a previous podcast. So we won't talk about that too much today. If you want to listen to that, head back to our cueing podcast. But I think we came out with a bit of a consensus there that for performance, using external cues is better than using internal cues. So MAE is based on the assumption that the individual can learn to correct their own movement. So not us giving direct feedback, via exploration of their mistakes. The concept behind MAE is that movements are stored and reproduced by following rules regulated through mastering of your body's constraints and degrees of freedom during the actual performance, rather than just storing a set movement in your brain that this is how to do this thing. Your body and your brain will take into account the context, the environment, how much movement you've got, and you'll come up with a movement strategy that hopefully suits the best for that time. So MAE uses forced exaggeration of the main error, and it helps the learner to make useful comparisons between the usual movement and the amplified error of movement. This comparison allows the learner to understand the effects of error on the outcome and modify it themselves. So have you guys heard of this before? Like normally when we're coming through uni, we get told to look at something and then comment on it immediately, saying what the person is doing wrong, and all the focus is on the thing they're doing wrong. What do you think, Nathaniel? Is it something that you do in your coaching? Do you focus in on the thing that comes in that they're doing wrong immediately, or do you do the method of amplification of error and tell them to exaggerate the thing they're doing wrong more?
So, Steve, we briefly talked about this before the show as well. But in the space I work in, I think you've sort of got to be careful doing the method of amplification of error, because it could actually lead them to essentially fall over. So a lot of the errors that you're going to be amplifying are things that they're not mostly going to be around weight shift or position of their feet. So if you get them to amplify that error, a lot of the time we're talking about it, we feel like they're probably going to just fall over. But I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I know, like, there's probably a point that you can reach where you're going to get them to amplify the error, and you're there with them and go, okay, well, look at how that feels. Let's try something else. I think that's how you could apply it in neuro anyway. I think it's very different to powerlifting and weightlifting space, obviously, but I definitely think we focus on what people are doing wrong all the time. Like, that's wrong. Correct that. So it might be something I can implement for sure.
So just to kind of put it concisely for me here, like kind of what's happening is these Olympic weightlifters in this time, they either have the coach sees them and they see hey, you're doing something that is either, to do with how it's going to make a more efficient bar path. And they give one lot of cues to go, an external cue to almost purposely try to make that bar path less efficient, put them in a worse position and see if they can figure it out better themselves. Or it goes, do the more traditional, what you would expect, like Nat was saying, you do more in your neuro and everything, is just going and saying, okay, you are creating this movement deficit. I'm going to give you a cue that moves you closer towards the idealized kind of bar path for this movement, which is the traditional way. And this study was kind of saying that that latter was not as good. So the actual error amplification, that MAE, actually improved things more. That's correct. I'm kind of making sure I got it all down.
Yeah. So
cool.
I think maybe giving the listeners some context into what they did in the paper here will hopefully highlight that a little bit more. So essentially what they did was they took 30 college-trained athletes. They were all pretty similar in age. They were between 20 and 30 years of age, thereabouts. They're all the same height, same weight. They'd all been lifting for over 7.5 years. So they're not new to this. They're experienced weightlifters and they're competing. What they did was they took 30 of them. They put 10 into 3 groups. One group got coaching where they didn't get any feedback at all. That was the control group. They were just told to do their best. The method of amplification of error group, they were looked at by a coach. So everyone was looked at by a coach, but this particular group, they were looked at by the coach, and the coach identified 2 or 3 primary things that you want to happen in the process of doing an Olympic snatch. So for anyone who doesn't know what an Olympic snatch is, it's just pretty much whipping the barbell off the floor over your head, catching it, and then standing up. So they would look at some things that have been linked to a more efficient snatch, and then they would coach these people in this method of amplification of error group to actually do the things that would lead to a detrimental snatch pattern a little bit more. And then in the third group, they coached them into, a more ideal pattern for the snatch. So how they did the study was each group did 3 trials beforehand, kind of as a warm-up. They did their own warm-up, whatever. They did 3 snatches. They had a quick break. The coach, who was a professional coach, and they had like all sorts of motion capture monitors to capture analysis on body parts, where they were going, the velocity of the bar, the symmetry, all of that kind of stuff. This professional coach analyzed all of that stuff. And then after 3 trials, he would say to the method of amplification of error group, using like a semi-external cue, a given saying. So for the method of amplification, he said, move your chest behind the bar as far as possible at the start position. So for those of you who don't know snatching, you don't want your chest to be very far behind the bar at the start of the snatch. He told them to exaggerate it. And for those in the direct instruction,
and Connor, you'll probably because that'll make the bar end like the path of the bar, rather than being close to you, it'll get further away and out in front, and then it'll want to go back behind you further when you're trying to catch it, make it harder to catch in that top position.
Yeah. So the snatch should be an S kind of shape, like a up from the floor and then in behind, but you don't want it to be a big loopy S. You want it to be a nice tight S. So what they did with the MAE group, they said, move your chest behind the bar as far as possible. So you're literally moving the bar out away from you. But in the direct instruction feedback, they told them to keep, they said, quote, your chest was too far behind the bar. Keep your chest over the bar as far as possible at the start position. And then obviously they did that on trials 1, 3, 5, and 7. And on trials 2, 4, 6, and 8, they just told them to do their best. Then after those 8 trials, they got them to do 3 on their own kind of thing. And they just said, cool, do your best, we'll see what happens. Everybody went away for a week. They came back a week later and they did the same. They checked their snatch. I think they did 3 trials in the second week. So they did 3 snatches the second week. And all they said was do your best. So there wasn't any coaching for these 3 trials. And then essentially what they found is that the method of amplification of error group, the people who are essentially told to stuff up the movement more or make it less desirable or move the bar further away from them, actually came back with a tighter bar path, came back with a more ideal snatch technique than the people in the direct instruction group and the control group. A caveat to that is, yep, the direct instruction group did get better than control group, but even between groups, the method of amplification of error group was significantly better than the direct feedback group. So, yeah, did that surprise anyone?
For me, it's not a new concept in any of that. Like I think in the course that I take, I talk about how they've known for a while. Say, I think one of the first studies on this was used with like workers and mouse work with like gain differences, and they found that if they kind of did say that they made, if you went left every now and then it would make it go right, and the people who they did that versus, or the people who they made the gain way more, they could actually more quickly figure
adjust
out
quickly.
Adjust quickly kind of how they were using their mouse versus people who had only very small errors that weren't as easy to recognize. So there's definitely that kind of part that this research is kind of building on. And then I think also, I guess in coaching, these type of things have been used quite often. And the other one is that contextual interference. I think of with this as well, being like, you know, when you teach someone something and you start to get, and then you want to almost get them into doing something that's really different to that task that you were getting them to do, but using similar areas so they can kind of map in their brain, go, oh, geez, this was a complete different movement pattern. And then you take them back to that original one and it becomes more robust. And I also have used this MAE without having known that that's what it was kind of called, in a lot of times in like teaching someone like jumping landing strategies, going into the hips and whatnot. So knowing that it would improve something better wasn't a shock to me. Interesting to know, we don't really know what they did in between the weeks in between, like in that week in between.
I think it said that they trained
normal training
as normal. Yeah, they did 15 hours of training.
We don't really know what they did as far as like what cueing they were kind of using themselves and thinking. You know what I mean? Like, so
yeah, for sure.
It is interesting because sometimes though, what I've found in my coaching kind of experience of this is sometimes if I'm doing, say, this with jumping, I'll do people who are landing way into the knees and just falling forward. Sometimes I'll put tie a band in front of them. I'll stand in front of them, get them to jump, and it'll make them kind of fall over forward. And then what they've realized though from that is, okay, oh geez, I need to go. And then the cues that they're giving themselves are like an external cue that goes posterior, because they have realized that they have that they've kind of picked up that big error and they know they have to do the opposite. So it's not me giving them that direct, or sometimes it is, sometimes it's how's it feel? Hey, I feel like I'm falling over heaps. I feel like the weight shift is going over. What do you have to do to get, I've got to shift back? And so it's hard to go, are they just thinking, hey, I know that I have to kind of shift back in that scenario? Or are they still inherently like trying to fix a shift forward? You know, you can't really go, are they actually just turning that error amplified cue into
direct
just
feedback,
a directed cue? Yeah, exactly. You know what I mean?
100%. So like they've figured out by making the error that, oh, that was shit, that sucked. Like they give themselves the direct cue.
Exactly. That's kind of how I implement it in coaching. So it's not that, it's kind of almost testing an A plus an A plus B to me as well here, because, well, that in my head is what my athletes, when I've used this, have done, is that. So that's the only thing that you can't really rule out here, is that you're just testing an A versus an A plus B, where,
correct,
you know, they've actually got that initial cue, but then they also get the benefit of, oh, okay, that was the wrong one. I'm going to use like internalize or externalize a directed cue that's posterior myself. So I think it's useful to point out a fault that someone's making, because it allows them to get that and feel it a lot easier, and then kind of, I don't know, that I think I was talking to you guys that environmental what is it? Not context, construct validity was the other one, ecological validity, where like if I were using this in clinic, I would always either help them come to that direct cue, or like they would probably come to that direct cue themselves. Like I wouldn't only just kind of bugger it up, but maybe if they could design a study to really constrain that and make sure that the people could never practice the other way, or make sure they weren't thinking that other way, that would change the way that I coached. But usually I put these two things together.
It's almost like motivational interviewing via movement. Like you have your goal task in mind, or you have your goal behavior in mind, and you're just like, all right, so what can we do about that? Oh, okay, so you've thought about that. What can we do next? Like blah, blah, blah. You're not giving the person the answer. You know the answer, and you're trying to direct them towards the answer. But potentially them figuring it out on their own is way more meaningful and way more impactful, because the self-efficacy of it goes up. They figure, oh yeah, I'm actually good at this. They get some confidence out of it. They understand it better. I think that's
the big thing that, and they even spoke to it in this paper of being like, it's the processes. They didn't study this directly, but they referenced other studies where like the actual kind of cerebral processes that it goes through when you force them to do that. I think that process of someone actually having to figure that bit out themselves and having to actually cognitively go through, and then also with all the error detective kind of autonomic kind of movement systems picking up these errors, is a stronger motor learning, because then they go, geez, this was my ingrained inset autonomic kind of behavior. And then, but if I amplify this a little bit, this is really, really crappy. So then they can go, okay, good, I'm going to have to try a different opposing kind of behavior that they figure out themselves. And now they have this big breadth and range of movement behavior that they can kind of choose between, depending on what context. And it's a lot stronger than like if we were just coaching it to them.
Yeah. So that's
I think the thing that's...
Go on.
Oh, you're right.
You go.
I think the thing that's interesting, though, I found between the three groups, like these aren't just like plebs of just picking up a bar for the first time. Like they're all very, very good lifters in their own right to begin with. And the control was the worst of the three. So like even just having someone saying, like telling them what they already should know help their lifting, which I found interesting. Like I would have thought these guys would be doing like snatch as part of their routine every week. Like you'd think that I wouldn't have thought there would have been that much of an improvement from control to the DI, because they're pretty well experts at that point.
Yeah, for sure. Like if you took something that I was a pro at, like I'm not pro at many things, but like let's just for argument's sake say that I was a gun at like say a tennis serve, and I know like the motions that have to go together to make a tennis serve, and then you're telling me something that would make it worse. Like it's going to be kind of hard for me to buy, let alone go and actively practice it. Like if you're saying to me like, oh, you should throw the ball up an extra, obviously you've got to identify the primary thing you think is wrong with it. And this is a constraint as well. Like if you're not great at coaching, like you might pick the wrong selected error like they did in this. So if you pick the wrong thing and told me to coach on it, it's not going to make me any better. Like if I don't kind of buy into it, if the error is not proper, I'm going to do the thing and just immediately think like, nah, like this sucks. Like, what's this guy doing? Like, why is he telling me to do this thing that's clearly wrong? Like, that's something that surely these weightlifters were like, bro, like I've been lifting for 7.5 years and no one's ever told me to throw the bar away from me as far as I can. Like, what are you doing? Like that doesn't have face validity to the weightlifter.
That's right.
So
whereas you tell a novice who's never lifted a snatch, like done a snatch before, like they're just going to listen to the coach and they'll try it a couple of times. They'll be like, what the hell? And then the coach will obviously, that's not what it should feel like. Now try the other way. Like Steve was talking. because you're not just going to solely tell them to do the opposite of what's efficient, but it's a good way to show them how it can feel if you get it not quite right.
And the thing was, with this study in particular, it doesn't sound like they told the athletes that. They just said, do this.
Correct. That's what
and
I mean.
Then they didn't like unteach them that. They just said,
no,
go do this thing. Have a crack at it. We'll see you in a week and see how you lift. Yeah, literally. Like,
I think an interesting thing there though is that like with an expert, right? If you've been doing something for a while, you build up your way of doing things and your way that your body feels good at doing things. And because you're so efficient at doing things your way, this is where it goes, like the difference in between the populations that you would use this in, like, you know, this strategy of trying to get someone to figure out something themselves, is you're basically trying to amplify something that they can no longer pick up themselves as well. So you're going, hey, like, you really aren't picking up this. If you were picking up this area, you wouldn't be in this. You'd just be continually getting better and better, and you'd be like at the top of the tree. You know what I mean? So you have this area that you can no longer pick up. I'm going to make it so like observable to you to pick up that then you're going to go so much in the opposite direction that hopefully, you know, pendulum will swing in closer to the middle, and hopefully that middle is going to be closer than where it was previously.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Move in,
yeah. That's kind of what the whole idea of that is trying to do. But as I said, you've got to look at your like populations that you're doing that in. Like someone first learning to walk again after a stroke, Nate, or like, you know, my little 2-year-old trying to learn a skill for the first time. I'm gonna make sure that she's getting like task success and kind of like getting that. They have to have like that, a level of competence, and then they have to have probably a level of competence where they're slowing their rate of improving competence as well before you go, yeah, bang, I need to pull on this because normal levers aren't working.
So I think that's a good point too, and it kind of links back to with specificity with these weightlifters. They didn't tell them to do their max weight or anything like that. They picked like 80% of their last competition weight. So it's something that you probably could shank and still get up. It depends how hard.
It's still heavy.
Yeah, it depends how hard.
Like still heavy, we have to organize yourself well enough to get it up.
Correct. So they're getting a go at experiencing like some different. It might be movement variability. They talk about that at the end of the paper, but they talk about like potentially they're still going to get, like you just said then, Steve, they're still going to get some success out of it. They might not amplify the error as much as what you want. Like you might be telling them to exaggerate the crap out of it, but what exaggerating the crap out of it feels like to them might actually look a lot tighter than like the bar being out here, for instance.
Well, if we have a look at the results there, the things like, yes, this is where like statistical significance and like clinically meaningful difference and everything has to kind of come into it. Like you're looking at things like, you know, and yes, it is clinically meaningful in something like weightlifting where every 1% is going to like get you, you know, possibly a gold medal or whatever versus a silver and whatnot. But like you're looking at like things of couple of centimeters maximum difference, you know what I mean? So it's like it's not like one thing they put it 30 centimeters further in front of them versus you're looking like the paths that the bars took were all quite close together. You probably have the I just can't remember the numbers off my head from the reading, but you probably have them in front of you there, but they weren't. It's not like you were talking night and day difference, you know what I mean? Like to an untrained eye, you probably wouldn't really be able to even see the difference that this made, but it has been powered enough that it was statistically significant and it's clinically relevant for the population. But really, is it like meaningful for too many things outside of where you are needing that extra kind of 1%? So yeah, that's where like I go into it. It's a useful tool that we have in the toolbox to use when kind of we need to go, hey, I'm trying traditional stuff, not really working here. Let's amplify this error and just see if this person can figure out how they're really stuffing this thing up with themselves. You know what I mean? Like that's where
Yeah.
I see it more as kind of, okay, their pendulum is sitting right over to the right. I'm going to push it way further to the right, so that way it swings way over to the left, and they realize that the left side even exists. You know what I mean? And then they're going to come back somewhere further over there, rather than trying to make these, like, in our jobs anyway, trying to make these like little 2 centimeter kind of differences, I guess.
Yeah. Like if you're looking at the results, like you said, that if I didn't know that they're statistically significant or whatever, I can see that they're on like a downward trend in the MAE group and the DI group. And funnily enough, in the control group, they actually got apparently worse at weightlifting in the week between giving them no feedback, making them do 10 lifts, 15 hours of training, and then do another 10 lifts. They somehow got
variability.
Yeah, it's just like, was it?
They had a shit week.
Yeah, literally. What did everyone
one dude just was cooked. He went out on the piston on the floor. He lifted a couple of times, and his performance was cooked. Like
the error bars are pretty minimal. But like literally, is it because it is a small sample size? Did everyone in the MAE group just have a shit hot day?
Right.
Like, is it
such a small group?
Is it like, if we talk about a normal distribution, is it 2 standard deviations out of their normal? Probably not. Like,
yeah, no.
So, and again, that's a limitation of this study. Does it show us like that they maintained that improvement in performance compared to what is optimal, like longer than a week? That would be something interesting to see.
And I think it's monitoring what they're doing, like training outside of that trial.
That's what
what Steve was talking about. Are they receiving that cue, like, or are they receiving different cues for that 15 hours? Like 15 hours is way longer than the trial. Like the trial would have taken them, what, like 15, 20, half an hour, and they're training another 15 hours in the week. So that's, or even, still, as I said, definitely significant.
When an athlete is clued on enough, like they pick up on those things, and even if they've been purposely not given that cue, they're giving themselves that cue. You know what I mean? They're going, yeah, like, okay, this getting way out in front of me is making me need to stay back a little bit. You know what I mean? So they're giving themselves a directed cue. Like, I just can't. I think that to go really strongly in this being a better version of an external cue, and those cues weren't even too external, I'm going to say that anyway. But I think for that to be better, it has to be able to tease that out a little bit better.
Yeah, so exactly, that's another limitation of the study, is that the external cueing wasn't like as external as it could be. Like they mentioned, like if I go back and I quote what they said to the MAE group, they said, move your chest behind the bar as far as possible at the start position. Like your chest is still an internal cue. And then the direct instruction feedback was still, your chest was too far over the bar. Like they could have used something else more external to maybe even further enhance performance, or maybe the direct instruction feedback group, their external cue wasn't as good as the...
Well, and really what we know about this, and again, like stuff I teach in the course, is that like even better to like set up the environment, and then like the closer, so I guess they're probably using chest because like if you bring something, the closer you bring the cue to the body's person, the more like tighter range or narrowed into kind of focusing around that body's person, and that's where you're wanting the bar path to be the closest. So whereas if you, I guess, set up an environmental constraint external too, but I would still be looking at some way of setting up the environment instead, where there was something, either an affordance or constraint, say that they had to be getting their body to kind of thing. And yeah, or
to that point, like I do weightlifting, like that's what I'm learning to do, and one of the cues that helps me with my bar path is rip your shirt off. So in the second pull, if I'm here and I'm not getting my shirt up with the bar,
oof, there's some abs.
It's not close enough.
The bar isn't close enough to me if I'm not hitting my shirt.
Yeah.
So they could have said,
that's a cue that I give, definitely.
Move the bar away from, I don't want the bar to touch your shirt. Move the bar as far away from your shirt as you could. Like that.
There's another cue, but it's not as PG. Squash.
It's also more external.
Squash the goods.
Yeah.
No, so like that's just one thing that I think potentially I don't know if
Yeah, we may have seen even better.
Yeah.
It's interesting. You may have seen even better because, yeah, definitely, like for setting up constraints, it's been shown, time and time again to be better to just have an environment rather than thinking about yourself to be able to perform a tighter movement pattern. So that's definitely everything from soccer kicking to golf shots to learning basics like gait. So it seems to be better. You might actually, Nate. Sorry, guess I know we wanted like 10 minutes, but neuro, that was the one place where it was actually we had a lot of. They always did knowledge of results and had all the cups on the walls and everything that you're aiming for. There was so much like
knowledge of performance, that is.
interesting, like so much internal stuff as well, being like talking about, like you're always talking about foot play. It's probably that weird mixed place where, because they actually don't have awareness of that limb or whatever, you're having to do the internal cue, which is better for EMG activity. But I'm just thinking of this as I'm saying it though. But internal cue, which is better for like EMG activity, but with like an external cue, which is better for performance. Have you looked into that? That's just where my head goes straight away, is why they would do so internalized cues for like getting
I haven't looked
onto the
into
body
it.
and talking about the body, but then having external kind of environmental setups as well, like knowledge of results and all that type of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think sometimes too, like they're obviously going to have impaired proprioception as well. So I often wonder, like, how good are those external cues actually? And like a lot of the time, sometimes the people who've had the stroke have had a cerebellum stroke. So like, how well can they actually organize them in space? Like, are our cues even really are they even like appropriate for them? Like we think,
So
like if that was me stepping up and I'm going to kick the wall, but like, is that cue even
Does it register?
like helpful for them?
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
And what does it actually mean?
Touch the cup. Oh, I can't feel the cup. You're touching the cup, or who cares?
Yeah.
Like,
That's
a bad
I don't know where
sensory.
my ankle is in space. Like I don't know where my ankle is. So like, me hitting that cup, what does that even mean? Like I'm just kicking the cup. I'm not succeeding in the task you've got me to do, but like, what does that mean?
If the error in the task is not hitting the cup, is your method of amplification of error, don't hit the cup, don't even touch the cup, and then they're not moving it. And you're like, yes, you're killing this. And then they're like, woo! But they're not getting better at anything. So like,
I mean, the cue stuff in neuro is interesting because you go down that path of like, you go down a rabbit hole around whether or not like those cues are ideal, and then you also introduce the fact that language can be an issue as well. So like, are they actually understanding the instructions that you're giving them? I typically will use external cues. I actually don't use internal cues that much. I usually use a target, but it's something I need to look at. And I'm looking at just doing a bit of a muck around with some of the MAE stuff that we talked about today with like some of my higher level stroke patients that have balance deficits, and just seeing whether or not we can make any change in their gait. But I mean, this is the sort of thing like these people only really improve over the course of like many years of like repetitive exercise. So like,
and that's where this would be interesting, of being like this study of being, okay, how I apply MAE is I apply it, but then it's like applying it to get them to realize there was an issue, and then I stop applying it because I don't want them to be continually practicing the
issue.
wrong thing. Yeah, the issue. You know what I mean? So
I think the premise of long term. I think the premise of the paper is though that if they've taken the issue into account, if it's such like a ingrained thing or it's something they haven't even registered with before, they'll naturally select something between, even if you don't tell them that.
Yeah, okay.
I think because I did have a look
that's what they haven't tested though. That's the limitation there. They haven't tested that.
I had a look at these group of authors, and they've tested it also in a golf swing, and they've also tested it in a broad jump. So they tested it in different populations. They tested the broad jump in preschoolers, so like kids in prep, and they got them to jump too far, and some of the they got them to jump as far as they could. And some of the errors they saw were like, oh, this kid doesn't bend at all at the hips, or this kid's knees are fully extended before they like leave the ground, or something like that. I can't remember exactly what it was. And what they found was that if they told the kids to amplify the error, so like all right, I want you to keep your legs as stiff as you can. So keep them dead straight and then jump. They got him to do it 3 times. And then they said, now jump as far as you can, do whatever you want, forget what I said. Then they nailed it. Yeah. And same
nice. That's cool.
Same with the golf swing. I just looked at these. They might be interesting to look at in the future.
Yeah, that's cool.
The other one was a golf swing. And what they noticed, the main error in the group that they had was that they weren't transferring weight onto their back foot, or vice versa. Was it their front foot? They weren't transferring it onto their back foot during their backswing. Yeah. And then when they were coming through, they weren't transferring it again onto their front foot. So what they instructed them to do was keep all the weight on their front foot throughout the swing.
Yeah, and it's terrible.
And then they got them to do it a few times. And then when they were like, oh, yeah, that's shit. Let's do whatever you want. Hit the ball, forgot what I said. They're like, I don't know how they measured it, but their driving improved. So
cool.
I think
I'm going to have to give that a try tomorrow, I think.
I think it kind of has been tested, but like it's only been tested, and this is getting along with the limitations of the study thing. It's only been tested in like really closed skills. It's only been tested in able-bodied individuals, like no amputees or people with diseases, and they allude to that in the discussion. They said further research will also be necessary to evaluate the persistence of the effects over time, which we just talked about, under psychologically stressful conditions, so more open environments. And we still need to explore the impact of MAE on learning of other sport tasks in novice and elite athletes to confirm continued success. Another extremely important field of research would be adapted physical activity, where it is important to develop and evaluate efficient therapeutic interventions aimed at improving balance and coordination. For example, help a person with a lower limb amputation relearn balance skills and weight transfer. So they're all the limitations we just spoke about with you, Nat, and that's kind of alluding towards the limitations you're getting at there, Steve, where it hasn't been checked in more open environments. I think that's awesome for this paper and these authors to be like, okay, here's the gap. Like maybe we studied this in the future and go from there.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a good place for them to go.
Cool.
And of course, over a longer period as well. But I mean, most studies are financially unable to do a study over a long period of time. Like maybe even over the course of like 3 to 4 months, 3 to 6 months, rather than just the 1 week after, like see if there's any retention.
The other thing I'd really like to see from these guys is like another, like a qualitative part to it where they ask the learner of their experience and ask the learner what they perceived with the cue, and then what they actually like, why they ended up choosing the movement pattern they did. And if it, like my hypothesis would be that it just directed them to give themselves a direct cue.
What is it about the method of amplification of error that makes them better? Is it the fact that it's movement variability and they're just doing something out of the ordinary and their body's figuring it out? Or are they internally recognizing the error and self-correcting thinking based on, okay, that was shit, I'm not going to do that this time? Like, what's the difference between those two?
Automatic or a cognitive kind of process?
Is it subconscious?
Like, probably a bit of both.
Yeah. And they allude to the fact that this is one of the first studies where they actually got qualitative analysis, but they got it from the coach. So the coach was the one who said, the bar path is a bit out of line or whatever, or their left shoulder's like not catching at the same point as their right shoulder, or their right foot's blah, blah, blah. Like they measured all this stuff and the coach gave qualitative results. But again, that's probably like they had movement markers everywhere. Is that still just like quantitative in a way, just the coach reflecting on?
Yeah, it's just like describing
exactly. It. Like I don't know how quantitative that is.
Yeah, I'd love to see the athlete's qualitative experience of it, because that would really let us know which is what a coach would normally do. Like at the end, you ask, how did that feel, and why did you do what you did?
Cool. Any other limitations or any other thoughts on this paper?
Just one other thing about the coach is there's obviously going to be an element of bias there, because it was the coach that got to decide what the error was, right? So like if you get another coach in there, they might decide that that's not the error that needs to be amplified.
And that limitation is that you've got to, they mentioned that as well, that You have to,
Like if Steve goes in there, he might be like, well, actually, it's not the fact that their shoulders are too far back. It's some other issue in the lift.
if you identify the wrong, or if you prioritize the wrong movement error in quotes, you're probably not going to get the same result. What if you did? Like, what if you did prioritize the least like big or the least demonstrative?
I guess that's what they're saying. There just won't be any change because like even if they actually make an adjustment to that error because it's meant to be less important, you're not going to see like a significant change in the performance because it's not really that big an error.
I see what we're getting at. We're getting at can you just bugger it up anyway, or do you have to bugger it up specifically?
And that's what they do. They do say to that. They said, we think although horizontal displacement of the barbell is accurate and valid measurable variable available to us for weightlifting performance, kinetic parameters such as ground reaction force, power should be assessed in order to measure the finer intricacies of improved performance. So like they were measuring the improved performance, like their definition of success fell down to what this coach saw on
bar
video.
Displacement.
Literally. So, and then thirdly, the errors were identified through qualitative analysis of the coach and they were not measured. So yeah, I think that's what they're saying is like, maybe at the next meet, we track them into the next meet and they only get MAE coaching. At the next meet, do they actually lift more weight? Or like if we put them on a force plate or if we put them...
Force plate would be a lot more,
practical, obviously. But like long-term would be competition, next day or next week, whatever would be force plate. Do we actually see a change or are they just managing to shank it in a way that looks better? Or are they just fluking it? Or are they just having a good day? Or... yeah, I think there's that comment that they made about kinetic parameters would be probably a better, well, maybe it would be a better, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Successful definitions of success. Maybe that would be like a better box to tick rather than what the coach saw.
The other thing that would be interesting too, because we've talked about it, is them actually implementing a trial of the two together as well. Like Steve was sort of saying that he does a bit of both. So like having a queue where they do MAE and then you're like, okay, well, how did that feel? Now try this and seeing whether there's any difference between what this study's showing.
That gets back to the point that Steve was making before about, is the MAE just getting the person to coach themselves directly? Like, are they getting A plus B anyway via feedback of MAE? That's right. So that's where Steve was saying.
It'd just be interesting to, it would be interesting to see if they actually did that in the trial. Like,
or if
give them both and see if there's any difference between them.
Or if qualitatively that's what the athletes said that they were doing. Like, oh yeah, that felt terrible. So like I thought to myself, that's not what to do. Like that might fill that gap. But no, fair point. Any other last things before we wrap this up?
I'm pretty happy with that. That was
happy with that. It was good.
Yeah, it was cool. Good article. Good article, and I think it'll be good to see what comes out.
I think they did well. Like obviously I'm not going into the stats and things like that. Someone, if they're a statistician, want to get on and read that stuff for us, and they can go through it. But we're not here.
Sounds good. I'm not a stats expert. I
don't know. Yeah, who is?
It's not for me.
Physio Stats was like, this is a p-value, and at the end of the 12-week course, I still didn't know what a p-value was. Anyway, I think the main takeaways from this are that yes, MAE potentially is a good way to try coaching. Yes, direct feedback is still better than no coaching or no cueing at all. But if you're struggling to get the results you want, maybe try some method of amplification of error. Like I think I've already tried it since reading this paper during the week, just on sit to stands. Like, okay, I don't want you to bend forward when you stand up. Like, yes, internal cue, but after
keep your trunk back.
Literally, keep your back against the wall as you stand up.
Never tried standing up. What an absolute nightmare. Yeah, I feel sorry for your clients. That sounds rough.
All right, stand up without bending forwards.
I can't do that.
And then they're like, oh, that was stupid. And I'm like, yeah, all right, now stand up, forget what I said. And so I've tried it already. So I think
Cool.
I've already got a takeaway from it, but yeah, did you guys get any big takeaways, or is that pretty much it?
Hasn't changed the way I do anything yet because I feel I was already implementing it, but I was just also adding the DI as well.
Yep.
Which part of that also comes down to the like you got to get a patient to buy in, or you got to get a person to buy in. Like they're paying for you to do a good service. You should be picking up something that to them they see, hey, this should be improving me, and they're not reading this study and they're going, in your example, Connor, they're going, does this physio fucking know what he's doing? Like, I cannot stand up. Like before I came in here, I could stand up fine, and he's telling me I got to keep real upright. I can't stand up.
Yeah, it's not a client that you're going to see. It's going to be a client you're familiar with. It's not going to be like a brand new where you're like, okay, try and stand up by keeping your back straight. And they're like, I'm never going to see that guy again.
And then you're like, can you just book in next week? And they'll be like, yeah, don't worry, I'll call you. We're all good.
Yeah, literally never to see them again. And that was what I was saying with like the athletes, like being like, does this have face validity? Does the athlete think, dude, what you're telling me is so cooked? Like, how did they get the people to buy in? Maybe they had good rapport with them. I don't know. Like, yeah.
Cool.
I think it once again comes back to the level of like learning, like same thing. Like we said before, you're telling a novice that sort of thing, they'll try and probably act themselves, but you're telling an expert in their head, and they talk about cerebellum as well, but like, they're like, I know what's good for a snatch. So I'm gonna do the opposite to what that guy said. So I don't know, but it's just like that little light bulb where they're like, maybe I'm not quite getting that right.
Yeah, cool. So I think that wraps up today's article. We will link it in the description below. We'll also link all of the Instagram page, YouTube, where you can find me, you can find Steve, or you can find Nathaniel. If you have any questions or any feedback, send it in. We'll put our email, which we also have now, in the link below.
RP@gmail.com or what?
Yeah, we're taking over the world. No.
Nice.
One paper at a time. But no, if you guys like today's show, let us know. Give us a rating. Leave us a like. Follow us. Do whatever you can, because if we can get this information out to as many people as possible, then we feel like we're making a difference. So thanks again for tuning in to the RPE podcast, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks.